What happens when authority is challenged? Not with fists, not with anger, but with silence, calm, and an unwavering sense of dignity. What happens when a man, too comfortable in the shadow of his badge, tries to flex power on the wrong woman? That night, the streets of Toledo, Ohio were empty, quiet enough to hear your own breath if you listened. It was just after 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, the kind of hour when the world is winding down, not expecting disruption. But Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace had learned long ago. Trouble doesn't send a warning. It just appears. She was behind. The wheel of a black government-issued SUV, nothing flashy, just practical and precise like her. The kind of vehicle that didn't draw attention unless someone was looking for a reason. She had just finished a strategy meeting at a military base 2 hours south and was headed home. Adrienne wasn't rushing. She wasn't distracted. Her driving was steady, her hands calm, her mind already shifting into rest mode. Her uniform was tucked away. She was off duty. Civilian. Or so it seemed. Parked on Reynolds Road, Sergeant Daniel Mercer sat bored, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through his phone. No calls had come through all shift. No incidents. He was restless, itching for action, the kind that made him feel useful, maybe even important. That's when Adrienne's SUV rolled by. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't swerving. But it wasn't familiar. And that, in Mercer's eyes, was enough. He tossed the coffee cup aside, flicked on his lights, and pulled out into traffic. Within seconds, the red and blue glow filled Adrienne's rearview mirror. Her response was immediate, disciplined. She slowed. She signaled. She pulled over. Her posture straightened, old instincts resurfacing. In her side mirror, she watched. The patrol car door swing open. Mercer approached quickly, not to the passenger side, but directly to her window, one hand on his holster, the other gripping a flashlight. No greeting, no explanation, just license and registration. Adrienne kept her voice measured. "Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?" He shined the light in her face, eyes hard, tone impatient. "You were drifting between lanes, didn't signal. Looked like you might have been drinking." Her eyebrow twitched. She knew she hadn't, but she didn't argue. She moved slowly, carefully, retrieving her documents. "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee," she said, sliding her ID forward. Mercer glanced down. "Military?" She nodded. "Yes." He smirked. "Doesn't mean you're above the law. I never said I was. That should have been the end of it." But Mercer's tone sharpened. "Step out of the vehicle." Adrienne's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "Sobriety test," he barked. "Out, now." She wasn't slurring, wasn't unsteady. She hadn't broken any law. "On what grounds?" she asked, still calm, still controlled. That's when his voice rose, accusing her of refusing a lawful order. And then, without warning, he yanked the door open himself. Adrienne didn't yell. She didn't panic. She simply reached down and pressed record on her phone. Her voice even then was steady. "Just so we're clear," she said, "this conversation is being recorded." For the first time, Mercer hesitated. Not enough to back down, but enough to feel it. He made her walk the sobriety line under the flickering streetlight like she was a Saturday night drunk. She passed flawlessly. Still, he wrote her a ticket. Failure to maintain lane. She took the paper without flinching. No argument, no raised voice, just a look. She got back in her SUV and drove off into the night. But what Mercer didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman he tried to intimidate wasn't just a name on a license. She was a commanding officer with decades of experience in war zones, disaster zones, and diplomatic zones. And unlike him, she knew exactly how power should be used. He thought the night was over. She knew it had just begun. He thought it ended the moment she drove off. He was wrong. That was just her first move. Mercer's mindset. The badge as Shield Sergeant. Daniel Mercer wasn't new to the job. He had worn the uniform for 15 years. In that time, he'd responded to street fights, car crashes, domestic disputes. seen the city at its worst and prided himself on staying colder than the chaos around him. Over the years, the job had shaped him, hardened him, dulled his empathy and sharpened his instinct for dominance. He wasn't known for kindness or compassion. He was known for control. He didn't ask questions. He gave orders. To Mercer, the E, badge didn't just represent law. It was the law. Final say. Ultimate authority. And in his world, anyone who challenged that, even politely, was a threat. Whether it was a kid mouthing off or a civilian daring to question his decisions, his response was always the same. Shut it down fast, make them regret it. It wasn't about right or wrong, it was about respect. His version of it. Back at the station the morning after the traffic stop, Mercer didn't give the encounter with Adrienne a second thought. He logged it like any other. Failure to maintain. Lane. Possible impairment. No arrest. Then he tossed his body cam into the charger, grabbed a donut, and headed into the break room with that same smirk he wore the night before. His version of closure was paperwork and coffee. Some woman tried to pull rank on me last night, he said to Officer Diaz, laughing as he leaned against the counter. Flashed her government ID like I was supposed to salute or something. Diaz raised an eyebrow. Government, like military? Mercer shrugged. Yeah, said her name was Wallace. There was a pause, then Diaz's expression shifted. His posture straightened just slightly. Wait, Wallace? Adrienne Wallace? Mercer blinked, suddenly catching the tone. Yeah. Why? Diaz exhaled, slowly. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. She spoke at the academy last year. Bronze Star. 2 deployments. She runs logistics at Fort Wayne. She's not just military, she's a legend. Mercer scoffed. Don't care who she is. On that road she follows my orders. Rank don't mean anything when I'm the one pulling the car over. Diaz didn't argue, but he didn't laugh either. And Mercer, despite his arrogance, noticed that change in energy, the way the room didn't echo his confidence. Still, he didn't check the footage, didn't revisit the stop. He'd filed the ticket. The interaction was over, but Adrienne Wallace wasn't done, not even close. B. Adrienne's decision. From silence to strategy, Adrienne hadn't slept much. Not because of fear, she'd been through war zones after all, but because her mind wouldn't stop replaying the stop, frame by frame. The way he barked commands, the way his hand hovered near his weapon, the way he tried to provoke her into reacting. She knew exactly how dangerous that moment had been. And she also knew exactly what it would have cost her if she had flinched. In her office at Fort Wayne, the morning sun cut across her desk as she sat in silence, watching the grainy footage on her phone again. Not out of obsession, but calculation. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, stepped into the room, reading her face. You good, ma'am? Adrienne looked up. No, but I'm handling it. He hesitated. I saw the video. Want me to call legal? She nodded. Already done. Daniels sat across from her. You sure you want to take this public? This could get ugly. Adrienne leaned back in her chair, the weight of years of command behind her calm eyes. I'm not looking for drama. I'm looking for accountability. She had spent 2 decades in uniform. She had led convoys through war zones, built systems in disaster response, taught young soldiers discipline, honor, restraint. And she had done all of that without seeking praise. But that night, on a quiet road, in her own country, in her own government vehicle, none of that mattered. To Mercer, she was just another woman behind the wheel who didn't obey fast enough. And that realization, the ease with which he dismissed her, cut deeper than the stop itself. So she moved. Quietly. Strategically. She submitted the footage through official military legal channels, filed a formal complaint, attached all documentation. She didn't shout, didn't go to the press. She followed every rule in the book because the truth was enough, and if it wasn't, she'd make it enough. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, reviewed the case with a steady nod. The stop wasn't just improper, she said. It might have broken federal code. Adrienne didn't blink. Then we go to court. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't even thinking about herself. What pushed her forward was the memory of every junior soldier who'd come to her in tears. Every black woman who'd told her they'd stayed quiet to stay safe. Every time she herself had bit her tongue in the name of keeping the peace. This isn't just about me, she said. It's about every woman who stayed quiet to stay safe. And this time, she wasn't staying quiet. C. Mercer's fall begins 3 days later. Mercer received an envelope at the station. It was plain, unmarked. Just a manila folder with his name typed neatly on the front. He tore it open in the parking lot, expecting another department memo or maybe a training notice. Instead, it was a court summons, civil rights violation, filed officially. Plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. Allegations, unlawful detainment, intimidation, abuse of authority. Mercer laughed out loud, too loud. No way this holds, he muttered to himself, brushing it off like a smudge on his badge. But when he stepped back inside the station, the air had shifted. No one said anything to him directly, but eyes lingered. Conversation stopped. The bravado that once followed him into every room now hovered like something colder, quieter. Discomfort, his commanding officer, Captain Dan Redding, called him in. The blinds were drawn. "We need to talk," Reading began. "About what?" Mercer asked, arms crossed. "That woman from the other night." Mercer rolled his eyes. "She's acting like a victim." Reading didn't blink. "She's not acting. Do you even know who she is?" "I don't care who she is. She got pulled over and didn't like it." Reading leaned forward. "She's a lieutenant colonel, a war veteran, impeccable record. She's got powerful allies and she has the whole thing recorded, from her phone and your body cam. This won't disappear." Mercer shrugged, but the confidence didn't reach his eyes. "So what? We just apologize 'cause she has rank?" Reading's voice dropped lower. "We have to take it seriously, Dan. And so will the public once this gets out. You're going to court. This isn't a joke." For once, Mercer had no sarcastic reply. Just silence. The kind that made everything louder around it. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In that time, Mercer felt it everywhere. The break room, the locker room, the hallway. No words. Just the sense that he wasn't untouchable anymore. That maybe, just maybe, he never was. Meanwhile, Adrienne kept working. She didn't tell her team, didn't make speeches. But behind closed doors, she was ready. Documents in order. Video archived. Truth sharpened like a blade. One woman. One phone recording. One silent refusal to be disrespected again, and the ripple had already begun. He didn't see a colonel that night. He didn't even see a person. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning. Not because it was empty, but because something unspoken hovered in the air. Everyone could feel it. The kind of silence that comes not from boredom, but from awareness. People weren't just attending a hearing. They were about to witness a reckoning. Adrienne Wallace didn't walk in with a crowd. She didn't smile. She didn't look around. But every step she took echoed in the room. She wore her full military dress uniform. Meticulously pressed, sharp lines, medals displayed not as decoration but as evidence. Proof. Bronze Star. 2 tours. Her rank clear, gleaming under courtroom lights. She didn't wear the uniform to intimidate. She wore it because it was her truth. That uniform didn't just represent where she'd been. It represented what she stood for. And that morning, she needed everyone in the room, including the jury, the judge, and the man who tried to reduce her to a traffic stop, to see her for everything she was. At the defense table, Sergeant Daniel Mercer sat still, but stiff. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time his expression cracked. The smirk was gone, replaced by something heavier. something that looked a lot like doubt, maybe even fear. The benches were filled. Officers from both Fort Wayne and the Toledo Police Department had shown up. Some were in uniform, others in formal wear. Adrienne's colleagues sat quietly, back straight, eyes forward. No applause, no whispers, just presence. Support without noise. To some in the courtroom, this was a simple civil complaint about a traffic stop gone wrong. But to Adrienne and to many others in that room, this was the culmination of something much bigger. Years of restraint. Years of watching people abuse authority with no consequence. This was about drawing a line. Finally. When the judge called her name, Adrienne stood slowly. Her posture was perfect, but not forced. It wasn't a performance. It was muscle memory built from decades of leading others through far worse than this. She approached the witness stand. No rush, no nerves, just quiet certainty. The courtroom followed her every movement. When she sat, the judge offered a nod. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, thank you for your service." She nodded back. "Thank you, Your Honor." Delaney Price, her lawyer, stepped forward. Calm. Focused. She didn't have to hype the case. She had the truth on her side. "Lieutenant Colonel," she began, "can you walk us through what happened on the night of January 17th? Adrienne's voice was level, smooth, and steady. "I was returning from a military meeting. It was around 11:15 p.m. I was driving the speed limit, signaling appropriately. I wasn't under the influence. I was driving a government-issued vehicle and minding my own business when I saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror." Price nodded. "What happened next?" The officer approached. He did not introduce himself. He immediately asked for my license and registration. When I asked for the reason I was stopped, he accused me of swerving and possibly drinking. I hadn't. I cooperated fully. I handed over my documents. I informed him I was a federal employee. "And how did he respond to that information?" Adrienne paused only a moment. "He smirked, told me I wasn't above the law. I never said I was." "Did he escalate further?" "Yes. He ordered me out of the vehicle for a sobriety test without providing a clear reason. When I asked why, he repeated the command more aggressively and accused me of refusing a lawful order." Price leaned in slightly. "What did you do next?" "I turned on my phone camera and began recording the interaction." The courtroom was still. Pens paused. Fingers hovered above notepads. Everyone was listening now. "Did you ever raise your voice?" "No." "Did you ever disobey his commands?" "No." "Did you threaten or resist in any way?" "No." "Why did you choose to record the encounter?" Adrienne looked directly at the jury. "Because experience has taught me that staying quiet doesn't always keep you safe. I needed proof." Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "Your Honor," Price said, "we'd like to play the plaintiff's recording." The video played. Adrienne's voice was calm. Mercer's was not. The screen showed his posture, aggressive, dominant, hand hovering near his weapon. Adrienne's hands stayed visible. She moved slowly, never once raised her voice. She followed. Instructions. She didn't argue. And yet the tone Mercer used made it clear. He wasn't interested in facts. He was asserting control. Then they played the body cam footage. It showed everything. The absence of justification, the tone, the escalation. The difference in energy between the two was undeniable. By the end, the room was frozen in collective discomfort. Delaney turned back to Adrienne. "Do you believe Officer Mercer treated you that way because he didn't know who you were?" "I believe he treated me that way because he didn't care who I was." Then it was the defense's turn. Mercer's lawyer, Charles Brenner, tried to find footing. He straightened his tie and forced a sympathetic tone. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, is it possible that Officer Mercer was just doing his job?" Adrienne's reply was immediate. "No." "Could he have simply been worried about public safety?" "I was not a threat to public safety, but you still recorded the stop." "I did, because accountability matters, and because too many people in my position have been left with nothing but their word." I wanted proof. Brenaire nodded slowly, clearly trying to maintain control. So you don't think officers should have discretion in these situations? Adrienne's gaze was unwavering. I believe discretion must be accompanied by self-control. A badge is not a license to do whatever you want. It's a duty. You could hear a pin drop. Even the judge paused, glancing toward Mercer, whose expression was locked. Jaw tight, hands clasped, the swagger long gone. Then came Mercer's moment. He didn't take the stand. His lawyer didn't dare put him under oath. But the prosecutor wanted him to speak. "Sergeant Mercer," the prosecutor said, "why did you order her out of the car?" Mercer's voice was low. "She seemed suspicious. Did she disobey you?" "She questioned me." "Is questioning an officer against the law?" Pause. "No." "Did she threaten you? Yell? Act erratic?" "No." "Then why escalate the situation?" Mercer was silent. The prosecutor took a step closer. "Sergeant Mercer, did you know she was a lieutenant colonel?" "No." "And if you had known?" A long pause. Then Mercer spoke, just above a whisper. "I might have handled it differently." It was the closest thing to truth he had uttered all day, and it landed like a blow. Because in that moment the courtroom understood. This wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about that specific night. It was about how easy it was to strip someone of their dignity when you don't recognize their value. Or worse, when you don't bother to look. Adrienne didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She just sat still, her medals gleaming beneath courtroom lights, her silence louder than any speech. The trial wasn't over, but the shift had already happened. Not because Adrienne had power, but because she had earned it. And someone finally listened. Real leadership is quiet, but it shakes the world. 3 days after Adrienne Wallace's testimony shifted the atmosphere of the courtroom, the final gavel fell. The jury had deliberated, quietly, carefully. The evidence spoke louder than any closing argument. The videos, the words, the silence between them. Every second had painted a picture not of chaos or confusion, but of a choice. One man's choice to abuse his power, and one woman's choice to rise above it. That morning, the courthouse felt different. There were no cameras outside, no chants, no protests, just a few curious onlookers, some local reporters hanging by the steps, and the people who mattered most. Those who had been watching not as bystanders, but as witnesses to something deeper than a legal case. They were there for accountability. Inside, the courtroom filled again. Adrienne sat beside her lawyer, composed as always. No nerves, no visible tension. Just stillness, like a soldier waiting for the final command. Mercer sat across the aisle, shoulders tight, jaw locked, hands folded like a man trying to hold together something already broken. Judge Cynthia Morales entered, her robe flowing behind her like a shadow of finality. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked across the room with a measured calm. "In the case of Wallace versus Mercer," she began, "the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff." Mercer flinched, just slightly. The judge continued. "The court rules that Sergeant Daniel Mercer violated the constitutional rights of Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace during an unlawful stop. His actions did not reflect proper departmental protocol, nor the standards of professional conduct expected of law enforcement officers." The room remained silent. No gasp, no applause, just the sound of truth settling like dust. "No criminal charges will be filed at this time," the judge continued, "but the plaintiff is awarded $35,000 in damages. This ruling will be a matter of public record. Furthermore, this decision will be submitted to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for further internal review and policy recommendation." Mercer didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't stand. He simply stared ahead, the weight of the verdict pressing on him like gravity. The man who once walked the station with a reputation for never backing down now couldn't even lift his eyes. Adrienne didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't fist pump or cheer. Instead, she gave a single, subtle nod, not to the judge, not to Mercer, to herself. She had done what she came to do. Outside, Mercer tried to slip away unnoticed, but even in his silence, the cameras found him. A few reporters snapped photos hoping for a statement, but there was none. He kept his head low, folder held high to block the flash. He didn't offer a comment. There was nothing left to say. His steps, once firm, now carried the weight of exposure, of consequence. The uniform hadn't changed, but the man inside it had. Not because he wanted to, but because now, finally, he had to. Adrienne exited later, quieter, more graceful. She paused in the hallway, checked her phone, and read a simple message from her legal team. You won. Case closed. Delaney Price. Hurry. Lawyer caught up to her. You could have asked for more money, she said gently. Adrienne shook her head. It was never about the cash. Delaney studied her for a moment. Do you think this'll actually make a difference? Adrienne looked out through the courthouse's tall glass doors, beyond the sidewalk, beyond the press, beyond this single victory. I don't know, she said. But maybe next time he stops someone, he'll hesitate. A week later, Mercer was placed on administrative leave. The department began an internal review. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd be reassigned. Others said his career was effectively over. Either way, the shield of impunity that once protected him had cracked. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne didn't change a thing. She didn't give interviews, didn't take a victory lap. She returned to her post as if it were any other Monday. There were tasks to finish, people to train, missions to run. She wasn't looking to be a hero. She was just doing what she always did, her job. But among her team, the message had been received loud and clear. That strength doesn't have to shout. That silence isn't weakness. That composure under pressure isn't submission. It's power. Weeks passed. Then came the day she stood in front of a new class of recruits. Young, eager, just weeks into wearing the uniform. Their boots still clean, their shoulders still adjusting to the weight of the rank stitched onto their sleeves. Adrienne didn't open with numbers or regulations. She didn't quote doctrine. She just looked out over the room, pausing long enough to let her presence sink in. How many of you, she asked, believe that wearing a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, some confident, some cautious. She nodded. I get it. I used to think the same. But here's the truth. She took a breath not for effect, but for gravity. Respect isn't given. It's earned, with every decision, every choice, every time someone gives you power and watches what you do with it. She let that land before continuing. The badge, the rank, they're not armor. They're responsibility. And if you can't handle that with honor, you don't deserve them. The room shifted. Some sat straighter. Others lowered their eyes in thought. One recruit in the back leaned forward as if the words were meant for him alone. Adrienne stepped away from the podium, then stopped. One last sentence. When an officer stopped me and forgot his duty, I didn't yell. I didn't run. I didn't crumble. I reported, I told the truth, and the system listened. Long pause. That officer didn't see a colonel that night. He didn't even see a person. But now he knows. Silence doesn't mean surrender, and calm doesn't mean weakness. She closed her folder, nodded once, and stepped down. No fanfare. No applause, just truth, quiet and unshakable. Because real leadership doesn't demand a stage, it earns one. And when it finally speaks, the whole room listens. The court ruled, the truth echoed. But the fight? It's far from over. Stay tuned. Part 2 is coming. The headlines moved on. But the story hadn't ended. Within a week of the verdict, Sergeant Daniel Mercer was officially suspended pending departmental review. Internally, it was labeled administrative reassignment. Externally, it meant damage control. He was no longer on the streets. His desk was cleared. His name wasn't scrubbed from the roster, but it no longer carried the same weight. The silence in the locker room had grown louder. Colleagues who once nodded in approval now walked past with half glances. The man who once barked orders and drew smirks of loyalty was now surrounded by closed doors and clipped conversations. Rumors spread like wildfire. Did you hear they're reviewing all his body cam footage? I heard the DOJ got involved. He might get transferred out of state or just quietly let go. No one knew for sure, but everyone knew something had shifted. His badge had once been a shield. Now it looked more like a mirror, and Mercer didn't like the reflection staring back. Back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne Wallace didn't change a thing. She didn't request special accommodations, didn't redecorate her office. She came in early, left late, ran drills, reviewed logistics. Like she always had. To the outside world, she looked untouched by the storm. But inside the base, her story had spread. Quietly. Powerfully. Among the new recruits, her name was whispered with a mix of awe and reverence. That's her. Colonel Wallace, the one from the case. But it wasn't the court that impressed them. It was how she carried herself afterward, with stillness, with certainty, without needing to prove anything. The junior officers took note. They watched her lead without posturing, speak without raising her voice, hold the room without demanding it. Because the lesson hadn't just been about a traffic stop gone wrong. It was about what happens when someone misuses authority and what real strength looks like in response. 1. Recruit said it best during a late-night debrief. She didn't fight back. She just stood firm. And that was louder than any yell. Weeks later, Adrienne addressed the base once more. This time, the topic wasn't chain of command or wartime logistics. It was accountability. She ended her talk with words that hung in the air long after she left the podium. Power without responsibility is just a disguise for fear, and silence helps no one. But even as she stepped down, even as the applause faded and the room emptied, something lingered. Because while Adrienne had closed one chapter, others were still writing themselves. Whispers from Washington hinted at a federal task force reviewing law enforcement training protocols. A well-known civil rights organization requested a closed-door meeting with her. One senator mentioned her name in a speech about oversight reform. Something was moving. Quietly, yes, but steadily. And somewhere in the noise, another story was starting to form. Back in her office, Adrienne received a sealed envelope. The sender was unknown. The contents, not yet revealed. But the expression on her face shifted as she read, first surprise, then focus. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the horizon. Because justice, Adrienne had learned, isn't a destination. It's a rhythm. A responsibility. A war fought in courtrooms, classrooms, and quiet conversations where truth takes root before the headlines ever catch up. This wasn't the end, it never is, and the next chapter, it's already coming.